Welcome to learning about using the quadratic formula to solve quadratic equations. Now before we've had these quadratics where we've tried to factor them and set each factor equal to 0 to find our values for x. But this one right here, it's not possible to factor because if you look at this is a real easy one of the bunnies, is that you cannot find any factors of 3 that add up to 7. 3 and 1 are the only factors, and those are not going to add up to 7. So we can't factor these right away, and we're going to have to come up with another technique. Well, one of the techniques is to use the quadratic formula. People always ask whether or not the quadratic formula will work every time. The answer is yes, it will work every time. It's a little cumbersome, so perhaps other techniques might be quicker and simpler to use, but if you are in a bit of a quandary and cannot factor or solve it using an easier method, then the quadratic formula will always work. Take a look up here. We have the standard form of a quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c. And all we're going to do with this formula right here is plug in our a value, our b value, and our c value and solve for x. So let's take a look at our first attempt here. We're going to go ahead and have x equals negative b, in this case 7 is b, plus or minus the square root of b squared, well, 7 squared is 49, minus 4 times whatever a is, in this case 1, times c, in this case it's going to be 3, all over 2 times whatever a is, in this case still it's going to equal 1. After you've set it up, all you need to do is simplify. Negative 7 plus or minus 49 minus 12 all over 2. A little bit more simplification, and you're going to have negative 7 plus or minus the square root of 37 over 2. Always ask yourself whether or not you can simplify these radicals. In this case, you cannot. So this is our final answer. Remember, though, this is a quadratic, and the highest exponent actually tells you your degree and also tells you the number of solutions. That's number, not hashtag, of solutions. Here we have two solutions. Don't be confused. We've got x equals negative 7 plus radical 37 over 2 and negative 7 minus radical 37 over 2. They put this little plus or minus to kind of save space. It does represent two solutions. It's just an easier way to write it. Let's take a look at another example. Again, this is non-factorable because if you multiply 2 times negative 1, you get negative 2, and I can't think of any factors of negative 2 that add up to negative 5, so we cannot use the head times the butt, or head times the butt find factors that equal the gut technique, so we're going to have to use the quadratic formula. So we're going to go ahead and have our x equals negative b plus minus radical b squared, make sure you put that negative on the inside, minus 4 times whatever a and c are. In this case, a is 2 and c is negative 1, all over 2 times your a value. As you get more familiar with this equation, you'll probably be able to skip some of these steps and figure out on your own what you need to write down. Simplify here, positive 5 plus or minus square root of 25 plus, remember, negative times a negative is going to be positive 8, all over 4. Simplify it even further. 5 plus or minus 33, the square root of 33. Since there are no factors of 33 that are perfect squares, this is as simplified as you can get. And remember, this is 2 solutions right here. Especially since our degree here is 2, our degree will always tell us the number of solutions we're going to find. Let's take a look at another setup. Here, the quadratic equation is a little bit in a different format. We've got the x's over on one side and the constant on the other. So we have to set this up just like we had it before in standard form. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So set it equal to 0. In this case, subtract 4 from both sides. Then we can go ahead and apply the quadratic formula. Let's first check to see if it's factorable. 2 times negative 4 is negative 8, and I can't think of any factors of negative 8 that add up to negative 1. So I'm going to use the quadratic formula, and if you recall, it's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. If you're lucky, Wednesday I will sing a very familiar song to remind you of the quadratic formula. I think some of you have heard it before, but it's an oldie but a goodie. So let's plug in our a, b, c values here into our quadratic formula. And I'm going to have x equals negative b, b in this case is 1, negative 1 is going to be positive 1, plus or minus the square root of b squared, well, negative 1 squared is going to be 1, minus 4 times a and c. Please don't forget your negatives. They're the smallest operation that we have, but it trips everybody up. Let's make sure we've got everything. That is negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Good. Let's go ahead and simplify this. And we're going to have 1 plus, remember that negative times a negative, 32 here, all over 4. And that's going to simplify to 1 plus or minus radical 33 all over 4. And again, I'll keep reminding you guys, this is 2 solutions. Let's take a look at a couple more. Here again, we have to set these up. Let's go ahead and add 4 to both sides. Now that this one is in standard form, let's see if we can go ahead and solve this one, use the quadratic formula. Well, what are some factors of 4 that add up to 4? I can think of 2 and 2, so perhaps we can factor this one right away. Let's find out. Factors of 4 that add up to 4. And set each factor equal to 0. And x is going to equal negative 2. And x is going to equal negative 2 here. We didn't have to use the quadratic formula on this one. It was easy to factor. That's good. But I want to use the quadratic formula just to show you that it does come up with the same answers. So let's hold off on this one here for a second. And we're going to have negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times whatever a and c are, all over 2a. Simplify, negative 4, and again that's going to equal x, sorry about that. So we're going to have negative 4 plus or minus the square root of Well, this is 16 minus 16. So that's going to be 0. That'll be easy to simplify. All over 2. So all I'm going to have left over is negative 4 plus or minus 0. In other words, just negative 4. All over 2. And negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. But Mr. Bova, you said that our degree represents the number of solutions. It does. You're going to have x equals negative 2 twice, and we call this a multiplicity of 2. Whoops. Let's go ahead and rewrite that there. Multiplicity of 2. In other words, you're going to have two multiples of negative 2. In other words, negative 2 and negative 2. You're going to have it twice. And that matches the same answer up here. Let's take a look at this next one. It's already in quadratic, in standard form. So it should be easy to plug into the quadratic formula. So I'm going to have negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, please don't forget your negatives, all over 2 times 1. So this is going to be negative 4 plus or minus 16 plus 12, which is 28, all over 2. It gets a little bit easier. We have to simplify this because I know that 4 is a factor of 28, and I can simplify this radical. So let's do that. Negative 4 plus or minus, I'll show you what I'm doing here, 4 times 7 over 2. I'm going to kick the 4 out because the square root of 4 is 2. So I'm going to have negative 4 plus or minus 2 radical 7 all over 2. Now if you look at this closely, you can see that 2 and 4 have a lot in common. So here's the fun kicker. I can still simplify this. I'm going to factor out a 2 from the top here. I'm going to have negative 2 plus or minus radical 7 all over 2. Remember, all I did was just factor out a 2, because if you multiply this back through, you're going to have negative 4, which we had up here, and then 2 radical 7, which is what we had up here. Now I can safely cancel these 2's, and I'm left with x equals negative 2 plus or minus radical 7. And again, these are two solutions. So just to recap, I want to make sure that you guys have some kind of idea of what we're looking for. Number one, set up in standard form. In other words, we need that in ax squared plus bx plus z plus c format. Ax squared plus bx plus c, set that equals 0. Then you're going to plug that into the quadratic formula. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times whatever ac is, all over 2a. Watch those negatives. Keep simplifying till it hurts. I can't tell you how important that is. Keep simplifying until you can simplify no further. And remember, you are finding two solutions. With these little guides, I'm sure that your trip through quadratic land is going to be fabulous. See you guys soon.